"Sir, your family isn't dead. I know where they are," the little girl told the millionaire. "Please comment what you thought of this story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and tell me what city you're watching from. I'd love to know if you enjoyed my story and get to know you better, so please subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help." The rain fell heavy over Oakhaven on that grey March afternoon, turning St. Benedict's Cemetery into a sea of mud and wet headstones. The drops beat rhythmically against the tops of the old trees surrounding the site, creating a melancholy symphony that seemed to echo the pain dwelling in that place. The sky was so heavy it looked like night, though it was only 3 in the afternoon. A fine mist began to form among the tombs, giving the cemetery an even more spectral appearance. Arthur Vance held the bouquet of white daisies with trembling hands, his fingers gripping the stems so tightly that some petals began to break away, falling silently onto the muddy ground. At 52, the tall, broad-shouldered man seemed to have aged decades in the last 2 years. His brown eyes, once bright and full of life, now carried a dullness that betrayed sleepless nights and purposeless days. The deep circles under his eyes told stories of tears shed on empty pillows, of recurring nightmares, of a loneliness so profound it felt physical. He walked slowly among the graves, his dress shoes sinking into the soaked earth with each step. The sound of the mud sucking at his feet was grotesque, but fitting for this place of death. The dark suit he wore was completely drenched, the rainwater seeping through the expensive fabric to his skin. But Arthur didn't even feel the cold that penetrated his bones. There were far worse pains than that. Pains no coat could warm, wounds no medicine could heal. The path to the grave was known by heart. Every Monday without fail, he came here. Twice a week in the first few months, then 3 times, until the routine settled into these weekly visits that became his only connection to what was left of his family. He knew every stone on the path, every tree he passed, every name on the headstones surrounding his family's tomb. He knew the groundskeeper who worked on Saturdays, the lady in black who visited her husband on Thursdays, the young widower who sometimes wept silently 3 rows ahead. Arthur paused for a moment before an old tomb, observing the statue of an angel with broken wings. Something in that image resonated within him. He felt that way too, broken, unable to fly, to rise above the pain that bound him to the ground like invisible chains. He took a deep breath, the damp air filling his lungs with difficulty, as if even breathing was a conscious effort he had to remember to perform. The white marble tomb rose before him, imposing and painfully beautiful. Arthur had insisted on something dignified, something that would honor the memory of Eleanor and the children. He had spent a small fortune on that monument, as if the monetary value could somehow compensate for the immensity of the loss. 3 names engraved in the cold stone, each letter chiseled with artistic perfection. Eleanor Vance, 38 years old, Leo Vance, 8 years old, Chloe Vance, 8 years old. The dates were identical, a cruel coincidence of fate. March 23rd, 2 years ago, a bus accident during a trip that was supposed to be just a short weekend excursion to visit a friend's farm in Northwood. Arthur remembered the day they left, a sunny Saturday morning. Eleanor was excited. The twins thrilled at the prospect of seeing real horses and chickens. Arthur had stayed behind, caught up in work meetings that now seemed so absurdly insignificant. "You'll come next time," Eleanor had said, kissing him goodbye. "There's always a next time." But there was no next time. Only a call at 10 o'clock on Saturday night. The police officer's voice on the other end, formal and distant. "There's been an accident. The bus went off the road near mile marker 347 on the interstate. I regret to inform you." The rest of the words were lost in a buzz in his ears. Arthur remembered dropping the phone, feeling his legs give way, screaming a no so loud and desperate that his neighbors called the police, thinking someone was being murdered. And someone was. He was. The person Arthur Vance had been died that night, along with his family. Arthur knelt before the tomb, his trousers immediately soaking with the rainwater pooling on the ground. He didn't even feel the coldness of the water. He placed the daisies in the bronze vase, arranging each flower with a meticulous care that contrasted with the tremor in his hands. Each stem was positioned perfectly, each petal adjusted. It was a ritual he performed with religious precision, as if the perfection of the arrangement could somehow reach those who rested beneath. Eleanor loved daisies. She said they were simple, honest flowers, without the pretense of roses or the arrogance of orchids. "Just like me," she used to joke, though Arthur always disagreed. Eleanor was extraordinary, but she had a way of finding beauty in simple things. In lazy Sunday mornings, in impromptu breakfasts, in shared laughter over unfunny jokes, she transformed the ordinary into magical just by being present. His wife had always been a woman of simple tastes, despite the comfortable life he had managed to provide with his construction company. Vance Construction had started small, just him and 2 employees working on home renovations. Over 20 years, it grew to become one of the leading construction firms in the region, responsible for commercial and residential buildings that dotted the Oak Haven skyline. Arthur had worked tirelessly to build that empire, always telling himself it was for his children, to give them a secure future. What a cruel irony. He had built an empire that now meant nothing. Money in the banks that couldn't buy back what truly mattered. Buildings with his name that looked like concrete tombs, empty monuments to his own ambition. Tears began to stream down his face, mixing with the rain that fell ever harder. Arthur closed his eyes, allowing himself for a few moments to relive memories that were simultaneously his comfort and his torture. Eleanor's smile in the morning, when they had coffee together before he left for work. She always woke up before him, made fresh coffee, and waited for him in the kitchen with that sleepy smile he loved. "Good morning, my love," she would say every morning, and those simple words were the melody that started his days. The twins' noisy fights around the house, bickering over toys and attention. Leo was the more daring one, always running, climbing, exploring. Chloe was more thoughtful, an observer, but no less adventurous. They fought constantly, as siblings do, but they were also inseparable. Arthur remembered once finding them sleeping together in Leo's bed after a thunderstorm, holding each other. All the day's antagonism forgotten in the face of mutual comfort. The Sunday afternoons when they had picnics in Willow Creek Park, and Chloe would insist on feeding the ducks while Leo tried to climb every tree he could find. Eleanor used to prepare ham and cheese sandwiches, the simple kind the kids adored. They would bring an old checkered blanket that had belonged to Eleanor's grandmother. Arthur would pretend to read the newspaper while secretly watching his family, his heart so full of love it sometimes ached. Once, Eleanor caught him staring and asked, "What are you thinking about?" And he replied with total honesty, "That I'm the luckiest man in the world." She laughed, that musical laugh he loved, and said, "Silly, luck has nothing to do with it. It's love." And she was right, as always. Arthur opened his eyes, returning to the cold, wet present. His hands touched the cold marble of the tomb, tracing the letters of the engraved names. "I miss you," he whispered to the stone, "every day, every second. The pain never lessens, it just changes shape." It was then that a child's voice cut through the heavy silence of the cemetery, making Arthur open his eyes abruptly. "Sir, your family isn't dead. I know where they are." Arthur's heart stopped for a beat. Then it accelerated violently. He turned his head sharply, searching for the source of that voice that seemed to come from nowhere, perhaps just from his tortured imagination. A few feet away, half hidden behind a leafy tree whose branches hung low with the weight of the water, was a small girl. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Her curly hair was completely soaked, stuck to a face dirty with earth, mud, and who knows what else. She wore old, torn clothes, too big for her thin little body that trembled visibly from the cold. A faded pink t-shirt that had once belonged to someone bigger hung loosely on her small shoulders. Jean shorts torn at the hems, bare feet caked in mud up to her ankles. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. Large, dark, piercing. Eyes that seemed to carry knowledge that shouldn't belong to such a young child. Eyes that had seen too much, suffered too much. There was an ancient age in those young eyes, a wisdom born of pain, that Arthur recognized because he saw something similar every time he looked in the mirror. Arthur's initial irritation was immediate and violent. How dare this child appear here, in this sacred moment, with such an absurd and cruel declaration? He was about to send the girl away, perhaps with harsher words than he would like to admit, when she took a step forward, emerging completely from behind the tree. The rain beat down on her small face, but she didn't blink, didn't flinch. She just looked at Arthur with those immense, serious eyes. "I saw her, sir. The lady in the picture you're holding, she has a tiny little scar right here." The girl pointed to her own left wrist. "Real thin, like a scribble." Arthur's blood ran cold. The world around him seemed to stop. Even the rain seemed to fall silent for a moment. That detail. How could this street child know that detail? Eleanor's scar was discreet, the result of a household accident years ago when she was still a teenager, trying to open a can and slipping with the knife. Just an inch long, so thin it was almost invisible. Few people knew about that mark. It didn't even show up in photos unless you knew exactly where to look. Arthur looked at the crumpled photo he held in his hand, an image of Eleanor smiling on the beach at Cape May, taken months before the accident. In the photo, it was impossible to see her wrist. She was facing away from the camera, looking at the sea, the wind messing up her hair. Arthur had taken that picture on a perfect summer afternoon, one of the last truly happy moments before everything fell apart. "How do you know that?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, laden with conflicting emotions. Anger, hope, fear, disbelief, all mixed in an internal storm that rivaled the one outside. The girl didn't seem intimidated by his tone. She took a few more steps closer, the rain soaking her already wet clothes even more. "Because I saw her working at the big hospital nearby, the one with the pinkish walls. She was wearing one of those white coats that the ladies who take care of sick people wear." Arthur stood up slowly, his legs protesting the movement after kneeling for so long on the wet ground. He felt dizzy, as if the world were spinning around him. His heart was beating erratically, so loud he could hear the pulse in his ears. Part of him screamed that this was impossible, absurd, a cruelty beyond measure. Eleanor was dead, buried. He had signed the documents, planned the funeral, wept over the sealed casket. But another part, that desperate part that had refused to accept reality for 2 years, clung to that impossible possibility like a drowning man clings to wreckage in the sea. What if? What if there had been a mistake? What if, by some inexplicable miracle, his family was alive? "St. Jude's Hospital?" he asked, his voice trembling, referring to the hospital just a few blocks away, an old building that had served the community for decades. The girl nodded energetically, her wet curls bouncing with the movement, flinging drops of water around. "You have to go quick, sir. She was there this morning. I saw her arranging little bottles in a small room, real focused. Looked like she knew what she was doing." Logic told Arthur this was impossible. He had identified the bodies. Well, not exactly. On that terrible day 2 years ago, when he received the call about the accident, when he rushed to the scene and then to the morgue, The bodies were so damaged by the fire that had consumed part of the bus after the collision that identification had been made mainly through personal documents found among the victims' belongings. Eleanor's wedding rings, the pair they had chosen together at a modest downtown jewelry store. Leo's blue backpack with his name embroidered by his grandmother in bright yellow thread. Chloe's pink purse with her favorite stickers, those of Disney princesses she collected with religious fervor. Arthur remembered the morgue employee, a middle-aged man with a perpetually tired expression, explaining that due to the state of the bodies, it would be better for him not to see them. "Preserve the memory you have of them," the man had said, with a professional kindness born from years of seeing shattered families. And Arthur, too destroyed by grief to question, had agreed. He had signed papers, he had authorized it, he had trusted. But now, looking at this small child with ancient eyes, a terrible doubt began to grow in his mind. But what if? What if there had been a mistake? What if his family was alive somewhere without him knowing? The possibility, however absurd it seemed, sank its claws into his chest and wouldn't let go. "Take me there," Arthur heard his own voice say, as if it belonged to someone else. "Show me where you saw this woman." The girl smiled, revealing a few missing teeth, those baby teeth that had already fallen out naturally. She held out her small, dirty hand, covered in mud and scratches. Arthur hesitated for only a second before taking it. The child's hand was cold and small, so fragile that he was afraid to squeeze it. Too hard. Something in his chest tightened in a different way. It had been 2 years since he had held a child's hand. Leo and Chloe loved to walk hand in hand with him, one on each side, swinging their arms as they walked, jumping on the sidewalks while he pretended to complain about the noise they made. "You're going to pull my arms off," he used to protest dramatically, and they would laugh, those crystal-clear children's laughs that now echoed only in his memories. They walked together, leaving the cemetery through the wrought iron gates that creaked as they opened. The rain was beginning to ease into a fine drizzle, but the fog was denser now, wrapping the city in a grey curtain. The girl led him through streets Arthur knew well, but via different paths, shortcuts through narrow alleys he had never taken in his years living in that city. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew every stone of those streets, every pothole in the asphalt, every hidden corner. She jumped over puddles with the agility of a cat, bypassing obstacles without hesitation. A street child, Arthur realized with a pang in his heart. So small and already alone in the world, navigating the urban arteries with an expertise born of necessity. They passed through a narrow alley where homeless men sheltered under soaked cardboard. One of them looked at Arthur with suspicion, protecting a bottle of cheap whiskey as if it were a treasure. They passed a bakery from which came the tempting smell of fresh bread. Arthur's stomach rumbled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since... when? Yesterday? The day before? He had lost the habit of eating properly, eating only when hunger became too physically painful to ignore. "What's your name?" he asked, as they walked, his voice sounding strange in his own ears. It had been so long since he'd had a real conversation with anyone. "Lily," the girl replied without looking back, focused on leading him through the urban labyrinth, her small bare feet slapping against the wet asphalt with a steady rhythm. "Is Lily a nickname?" "It's the name I like. My real name doesn't matter anymore." There was something deeply unsettling in that answer, in the way such a young child spoke with such detachment about her own identity, as if she had left behind not just a name, but an entire life. Arthur wanted to ask more, to find out where her parents were, why she was alone on the streets. But they arrived at the hospital before he could form the questions. St. Jude's Hospital rose before them, an old 4-story building with walls that were once white, but now displayed a faded pinkish hue, stained by years and pollution. The paint was peeling in several places, revealing the grey concrete beneath. The old windows had those protective bars that public hospitals often have. People entered and left through the main door, a constant flow of sick and desperate humanity. Lily pulled Arthur to the side, bypassing the main entrance and leading him to a side window on the first floor, half hidden behind overgrown bushes that no one had pruned in months. The ground there was muddy, and Arthur had to stoop to pass under a low branch. "There," she pointed with her small finger. "That's the room where I saw her." Arthur pressed his face against the wet glass, his hands cupped around his eyes to see better through the reflection and condensation on the surface. It was a small medicine room with metal shelves, full of vials and boxes organized with white labels. The fluorescent lighting gave the room a cold, clinical glow, and there was a woman inside, her back to the window, wearing a white lab coat that seemed too big for her, organizing something on one of the upper shelves. She was stretching on her tiptoes to reach, moving boxes from side to side with methodical movements. Arthur's heart almost stopped. The silhouette was identical. The height, about 5'5". The way she moved her arms, with that economic grace. Even the way she tilted her head slightly to the side when she was concentrating, as if listening to music only she could hear. It was Eleanor. It had to be Eleanor. His heart was beating so hard now that Arthur was sure it was going to explode. His hands were shaking violently. He had to be sure. He had to see her face. He knocked on the window, a desperate blow that echoed louder than he intended. The woman turned, startled, almost dropping the box she was holding, and when she turned completely, showing her face illuminated by the cold light of the room, Arthur felt the world collapse again. It wasn't Eleanor. It was a woman who looked similar, yes, with similar features, brown hair of the same length, a similar body structure, but it was definitely not his wife. The eyes were different, lighter, without that golden glint Eleanor's eyes had when the light hit them just right. The shape of her nose, a little more upturned, the line of her jaw more angular. A stranger who happened to have a similar silhouette and a similar way of moving. The woman frowned, confused by this man in a wet suit staring through the window. She said something Arthur couldn't hear through the glass, probably asking if he needed help or threatening to call security. Arthur staggered back, away from the window as if he had been punched in the stomach. The pain he felt was physical, visceral. For a few minutes, he had allowed hope to enter. He had allowed himself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, there was a miracle. And now reality crashed down on him again like a ton of bricks. Lily watched him with an expression that mixed confusion and determination. Her big eyes seemed genuinely surprised by his reaction. "It's not her." Arthur's voice came out broken, hoarse. "It's not my wife." "But I saw her," Lily insisted, her small voice firm, stubborn. "I'm sure I saw a lady just like the one in the photo. Maybe she's not here anymore. Maybe she left. Sometimes people go from one hospital to another, right?" Anger exploded in Arthur's chest like a volcano. Anger at being foolish enough to believe. Anger at having allowed hope. Anger at this child for planting an impossible seed in his already shattered heart. How dare this child play with his feelings like that? How dare she give him false hope about something so painful? He turned to her, ready to unload all his frustration and pain, his mouth already opening to shout harsh words he knew he couldn't take back. But when he looked into those big, sincere eyes, when he saw that small body trembling with cold under the soaked clothes, the anger died in his throat. She was just a child, a lost, lonely child, probably trying to help in the only way she knew how, or maybe trying to earn some money or a favor with his vulnerability. Either way, she was just another victim of this cruel world, as lost as he was. "Go home, Lily," Arthur said, his voice tired, empty, "and don't make up any more stories about things you don't understand." He turned his back and started walking back to where he had parked his car near the cemetery, his steps echoing on the wet asphalt. His steps were heavy, automatic, each foot lifted and placed in front of the other in a mechanical motion, without thought. How foolish he had been to believe, even for a few minutes, in that absurd possibility. His family was dead, buried. That tomb he visited every week was not just an empty monument. It was the final resting place of the people he loved most in the world. The rain started to fall harder again, as if the sky wanted to wash away that whole scene, all that false hope, and carry it down the drains, along with the city's filth. Arthur didn't even try to protect himself, letting the water fall on him, through him. But as he walked, as his legs carried him automatically back to his car, to his empty life, Arthur couldn't get the detail of the scar out of his head. How did Lily know about that scar? It was such a small, specific detail, not something you would randomly guess. She has a mark on her face, would be an obvious guess. She has long hair, would be generic. But a thin scar on the left wrist? A coincidence? Maybe she had seen the scar in some old photo he didn't even remember posting in an obituary or on social media. Or maybe it was just a lucky guess, a 1 in a million chance of getting a random detail right. But the doubt was planted now, a small seed that didn't want to be uprooted. For the next few days, Arthur tried to return to his routine, if you could call it that. He woke up early, not because he wanted to, but because sleep rarely lasted more than 3 or 4 hours. He would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the moisture stains that formed abstract patterns. Sometimes he saw faces in those stains. Sometimes he saw Eleanor's face. He would get up, go to the construction company's office in a commercial building downtown, pretend to work while his mind wandered to distant places. His partners, Richard and Mark, and the employees were already used to his absent behavior. In the first months after the accident, they had taken on most of the responsibilities, keeping the company running while Arthur sank into his grief. They were kind about it, never complaining openly, although Arthur knew his absence created extra work. "Take all the time you need," Richard had said at the funeral, squeezing his shoulder tightly. "The company can wait. Take care of yourself." Now, 2 years later, he was physically present, sitting in his executive leather chair, signing documents placed in front of him, attending meetings where he nodded in agreement, but registered nothing of what was said. But his soul still wandered somewhere between the past and the present, unable to move forward into the future. His office remained almost exactly as it was before the accident. The framed photo of Eleanor and the children was still on the desk, though he had turned it face down because it was too painful to look at. The drawings Leo and Chloe had made for him were pinned to the bulletin board. A building of blocks made by Leo, all crooked but with a red heart drawn on top. A family of stick figures drawn by Chloe, 4 figures holding hands with huge smiles. It was a rainy Thursday, almost a week after the encounter in the cemetery, when Arthur saw Lily again. He was leaving a particularly tedious meeting with construction material suppliers, discussions about cement prices and delivery deadlines that seemed absurdly trivial in the grand scheme of things. He was walking distractedly to his car in the commercial building's parking lot where his office was, his eyes on the ground, his mind nowhere, when he saw her. She was sitting on the sidewalk in front of the building, apparently waiting for him. The same old clothes, or maybe different clothes, but just as worn. The same tangled hair, now dry but full of knots. She was playing with a bottle cap on the ground, making it spin in circles. This time, Lily was not alone. A middle-aged man, thin and with a ragged appearance, was next to her, leaning against the building's wall. He had that air of someone who had seen better days, dirty and wrinkled clothes, a beard of several days, red eyes that betrayed nights of drinking. When he saw Arthur approaching, the man poked the girl hard in the shoulder, making her jump in fright. "Go on, girl! Do what I told you!" The man growled, his voice harsh and threatening. It wasn't the voice of someone asking. It was the voice of someone ordering and expecting obedience. Lily ran to Arthur, her small, bare feet pattering quickly on the concrete. She stopped in front of him, almost colliding with his legs. "Sir, sir, I found more things about your family." She spoke hurriedly, the words stumbling over each other, her eyes casting nervous glances back to where the man was watching. Then, with a menacing expression, his arms crossed over his thin chest, Arthur looked from the girl to the man and back to the girl, and then everything became clear, crystal clear. A scam, of course. The child was being used by that guy to run scams on vulnerable people. They had probably researched him, found out about the family tragedy through newspaper archives still available online. "Businessman loses family in tragic accident," the headlines had said. His photo had been published, his address was probably public through company records, and now they were trying to extort him with false hope, knowing a desperate man would pay anything for a crumb of possibility. "How much?" Arthur asked dryly, his voice devoid of emotion, reaching for his wallet in his jacket's inner pocket. He wasn't even angry, really, just tired, so deeply tired. Lily blinked in confusion, her forehead wrinkling. "How much? For what? How much do you want? You and that man over there? To continue with this farce that my family is alive?" The confusion in the girl's eyes seemed genuine, but Arthur was no longer willing to believe her. He had fallen for it once. He wouldn't fall in for it again. He took a few bills from his wallet, 5 $20 bills, and held them out to Lily. "Take this and leave me alone. Don't show up in front of me with these stories anymore." Lily looked at the money, but didn't take it. She simply stared at the bills as if they were something strange, something she didn't understand. Instead, she grabbed Arthur's hand with both her small, dirty hands, her long, dirty fingernails digging into his fingers with surprising strength for someone so small. "I don't want your money, sir. I just want to help. I know things, important things about that day." "What day?" Arthur asked, even though he already knew the answer, a part of him unable to resist asking. "The day of the accident. I was there." Arthur felt a chill run down his spine, starting at the base of his neck and descending to the base of his spine. The world around seemed to quiet down suddenly. "What do you mean you were there?" "I saw everything. The bus crashed and caught fire. But before everyone arrived to help, there was a man who pulled some people out, live people. I saw him." "That's impossible," Arthur heard his own voice say, but there was less conviction in it now. "The official report said there were no survivors. All passengers died on impact or in the fire." Lily shook her head vehemently, her curls hitting her face. "No, sir, I saw it. The man pulled out a lady and 2 small children. He put them in an ambulance and left before the firefighters arrived. I tried to tell people later, but nobody listened to me. They said I was too little, that I had imagined things because of the shock." Arthur's heart hammered. In his chest now, each beat physically painful. Part of him screamed that this was absurd, impossible, just another layer of that cruel scam. But another part, the part that had never been able to fully accept the loss, desperately wanted to believe, needed to believe. "Where were you exactly? How was a child so small alone on a highway?" "I had run away," Lily answered in a low, ashamed voice. "Run away from a bad place. I was walking along the road when I saw the accident happen. I hid behind some trees because I got scared, but I saw everything." Before Arthur could respond, formulate more questions, process that revelation, the man accompanying Lily approached with heavy steps that made the ground seem to shake. Seen up close, he was even more unpleasant than he appeared from a distance. Bloodshot eyes, a strong smell of alcohol, even though it was mid-afternoon, dirty clothes with stains Arthur preferred not to identify, an ugly scar crossing his left eyebrow. "Oscar," he introduced himself without extending his hand, his voice laden with something that could be a threat or simply contempt. "I see my girl here is bothering you. She has A habit of making up stories. You can't believe a word that comes out of that little mouth. It's not made up, Lily protested, her voice rising an octave, desperate to be believed. I saw it. I really saw it. But Oscar pulled her by the arm with force, his thick fingers closing around the girl's thin arm like a vice, making the girl let out a small cry of pain that cut Arthur like a knife. Something in Arthur ignited at the sight of it. A switch he didn't even know he had was flipped, without thinking, without weighing. The consequences. He stepped forward and grabbed Oscar's wrist tightly, his fingers squeezing until he felt the bones beneath the dirty skin. Don't touch her like that. Oscar smiled, revealing yellowed and some missing teeth, a black hole where his upper incisors should have been. Well, well, the rich mister wants to play the hero. The girl is my problem, not yours. I take care of her, feed her, give her a roof. I can discipline her however I want. Let her go now. Arthur's voice was low, dangerous, a tone he hadn't used in years since the days when he worked directly on construction sites and had to deal with problematic workers. He was not a violent man by nature, but something about this situation struck a sensitive chord in him. For a moment, it seemed like Oscar would argue, his eyes narrowing, his muscles tensing. Arthur saw the calculation happening behind those bloodshot eyes. A ragged man against a well-dressed man in front of a busy commercial building. The odds weren't good. Oscar must have seen something in Arthur's gaze that made him reconsider. He let go of Lily's arm with a shove, making the girl stumble to the side, almost falling. She knows too much, Oscar muttered as he walked away, but loud enough to be heard. Should have kept quiet from the start. A girl who doesn't know how to shut up only gets into trouble. And then he simply turned his back and walked away, his uneven gait suggesting he was more drunk than he appeared. Lily stood there, rubbing the arm where Oscar had held her. Even through the dirt, Arthur could see red marks forming, the shape of the man's fingers imprinted on her skin like a stamp. Small tears welled up in her eyes but didn't fall, as if she were used to holding them back, not allowing herself to cry because crying was admitting weakness. Arthur looked at her, really looked for the first time beyond the surface. He saw the old torn clothes, noticing now how inadequate they were for the weather, with no layers for protection. He saw the bare, dirty feet covered in calluses and small cuts that must have hurt, but which she ignored. He saw the tangled hair that had probably never seen a proper comb. And he saw the old bruises on her thin arms, finger marks that indicated this had not been the first episode of violence. There were marks in various stages of healing, yellowish, greenish, purple. This child was being abused regularly, and no one was doing anything about it. Come on, he heard his own voice say, surprising himself. Let's get something to eat. Arthur took Lily to a nearby bakery, the central bakery he used to frequent in the old days when he came to work early and grabbed a hot cheese roll for breakfast. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and the woman behind the counter looked at them with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval, her eyes lingering on Lily's appearance. The girl devoured 2 warm cheese rolls, straight from the oven, the melted cheese burning her tongue, but she didn't seem to care. She drank a large glass of chocolate milk in big, desperate gulps. She ate 2 thick slices of carrot cake with chocolate frosting, her little hands getting dirty with melted chocolate. All with a speed that revealed how hungry she was, how used she was to not knowing when the next meal would be. Arthur watched her eat in silence, his own coffee growing cold, untouched in the cup in front of him. He had ordered a grilled cheese but couldn't eat, his stomach too tight with conflicting emotions. Part of him still thought this was an elaborate scam, but another part saw only a hungry, lonely, scared child. When Lily finally finished, wiping the crumbs from her face with the back of her hand and leaving a trail of chocolate on her cheek, Arthur leaned forward, his elbows on the formica table. Tell me everything, from the beginning, about the accident, about what you saw, everything." And Lily told him, sitting in that plastic chair in the bakery, with a few customers looking curiously at the unlikely pair, she opened her heart and her memories. With a clear voice for such a young child, each word articulated with care as if she had rehearsed this story many times in her head, she described how she had run away from a municipal orphanage in Northwood 3 days before the accident. How she had walked along the highway, hungry and scared, her bare feet bleeding on the hot asphalt, looking for a place to hide, a place where the people from the orphanage wouldn't find her. "They were mean there," she explained, her voice getting lower. "They hit the kids who did things wrong, and I was always doing things wrong by accident." She described how she was resting in a small grove by the side of the road, having found a little space between the trees where the ground was soft with fallen leaves. She was almost asleep, exhausted from the walk, when she heard the terrible sound of the collision. "The bus hit a big tree," she described, her eyes growing distant as if reliving the scene frame by frame in her mind. "It made a really loud noise, like the world was breaking, and then smoke started coming out. I got really scared and hid better among the trees, really low so no one would see me. But I could see everything." According to Lily, a few minutes after the accident, before any official help arrived, an ambulance stopped at the scene. There was no siren, she remembered that clearly. The ambulance just arrived, silent as a ghost. A man in a uniform got out and entered the wrecked bus with quick, determined movements. She saw him emerge, carrying an unconscious woman first, her body limp in his arms. Then he went back twice more to retrieve 2 small children, one in each arm. He put them in the ambulance and left really fast, Lily concluded, her small hands trembling slightly as she remembered. When the firefighters arrived later, maybe 15 minutes later, there was fire everywhere. But I know those 3 people the man took out were alive. I saw them moving, their arms swinging loosely. "Why didn't you tell anyone this at the time?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling slightly, his heart beating so hard he was sure she could hear it. "I tried," Lily replied, tears finally starting to fall now, leaving clean tracks on her dirty face. "When the firefighters arrived, I came out of my hiding place and tried to talk to them. I tugged on the sleeve of one of them, a tall man with a yellow helmet, but they were too busy putting out the fire and pulling people out. One of the firefighters took me away, said it was dangerous to stay there, that a little kid shouldn't see those things. Later they took me to the police station. I tried to tell them about the man from the ambulance. I talked to a young female officer who was nice to me, but nobody believed me. They said I was too young, that I was scared, that I had imagined things. They said that sometimes when we're really scared, our head makes up stories." "And how did you end up with Oscar?" Lily's face closed off, her lips tightening into a thin line. "He showed up at the police station the next day. Said he knew me, that he was my uncle, that my mother had asked him to pick me up. The police believed him. They didn't even ask for ID or anything. They just handed me over to him. But he's not my uncle. He's mean. He makes me beg for money on the streets, hits me if I don't get enough, locks me in dark places when he's mad at me." Arthur felt his throat tighten, a wave of anger and sadness washing over him. A 4-year-old child, alone, traumatized by witnessing a terrible accident, handed over to a stranger who clearly exploited and abused her. The system had failed her on every possible level. Every adult who should have protected her had failed. "Why did you look for me? In the cemetery, how did you know who I was?" "Oscar showed me your picture in the newspaper. When the accident happened, your photo was in all the news." Oscar would look at the news on his phone. He seemed nervous about something, kept pacing and muttering to himself. One day, I heard him talking to himself, or maybe on the phone, saying you were a rich man who had lost his family in the accident. When I saw you in the cemetery, I recognized your face from the photo, and I thought you deserved to know the truth. And the story about the scar, how did you know about that? Lily looked at her own hands, her dirty nails. I saw the lady when the man took her out of the bus. He carried her right past where I was hiding, so close I could see her face. Her shirt had torn in the accident, and I saw the scar on her wrist. I thought it was pretty. It looked like a drawing, like a pencil scribble. It was one of the things I remembered most afterwards. Arthur ran his hands over his face, his rough palms scratching against his stubble, trying to process it all. Was it possible? Could there really be some truth to this absurd story? Or was it all just the traumatized imagination of a child too young to understand what she had witnessed, mixing real memories with dreams and fears? But that detail of the scar, that damn detail she shouldn't know, he had to know. He had to investigate, no matter how painful or futile it might be. Because if there was even the slightest possibility that his family was alive somewhere, he had to find out. He had to try, because living with the doubt would be worse than living with the certainty, even if it was the certainty of loss. Could you recognize the man from the ambulance if you saw him again? Lily nodded her head, confident now. I think so. He had a big mustache, one of those really thick ones that cover the whole lip, and a mark on his face, like a dark spot here. She pointed to her own neck, just below her ear. Arthur stood up, his mind already forming. A plan. First, he needed to review the official accident report, then find out which ambulances were in the area that day, check dispatch records. It would be a start, a thread to pull in this impossible tangle. Where are you living? He asked Lily, though he already suspected the answer. Nowhere. We stay in different places. Sometimes Oscar leaves me in an old shed near a scrapyard, locks me in there when he goes drinking. Sometimes we sleep under a bridge. There's a place where other homeless people stay, sometimes in shelters when it's really cold, but Oscar doesn't. Like it because they ask too many questions. The answer cut Arthur like a sharp, clean, deep knife. This child didn't even have a safe place to sleep. No warm mattress, no pillow, no blanket other than what she could find on the streets. He took more money from his wallet. Several bills this time. All the cash he had on him. It must have been about $100. He put the bills on the table along with one of his business cards, the ones with the gold Vance Construction logo. Keep this. Buy food, buy clothes if you can. If you need anything or if Oscar hurts you again, call this number. Anytime, day or night, understand, there's always someone to answer, even in the middle of the night. Lily took the money and the card with trembling hands, looking at Arthur as if he were some kind of miracle, some angel who had descended to help her. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. You're the first person who's been kind to me since... She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Arthur could imagine the rest. Arthur, my name is Arthur. Thank you, Mr. Arthur. In the following days, Arthur plunged into an obsessive investigation that consumed every waking moment and even his dreams. He managed to get a complete copy of the official accident report through his contacts in the municipal government, people who owed him favors due to construction projects that had benefited the city. He read every word, every technical detail, every witness testimony, every forensic measurement, looking for inconsistencies, for holes in the official story. And he found some. The main one was the identification of the bodies. His family had been identified primarily through personal belongings and documents. Due to the state of the bodies after the fire, visual recognition had not been possible. The report contained photos that Arthur could barely look at, bodies charred beyond the possibility of visual identification. Arthur vaguely remembered signing papers authorizing identification through documents, but at that time he was so shattered by grief that he could barely think straight, barely sign his own name without his hand shaking so much it became illegible. But now, reading carefully, with a clearer mind than he'd had in months, he realized there was no conclusive forensic evidence that those bodies were really Eleanor. Leo and Chloe. DNA tests were never done. Why? The report mentioned something about the bodies being too charred for viable genetic material extraction, but was that really true? Arthur started researching online, reading medical and forensic articles. He discovered that even in cases of severe charring, it was still often possible to extract DNA from teeth or internal bones. So why wasn't it done in his family's case? He also discovered, through meticulous research of public records and a few discreet calls to contacts in hospitals, that there were officially unregistered ambulance calls in that region on the day of the accident. Small inconsistencies in dispatch records, ambulances appearing in one place and then disappearing from the logs, time gaps that didn't make sense. At the time, no one had questioned it due to the general chaos of the situation, but now, with more attentive eyes, the inconsistencies screamed. The more he investigated, the more questions arose, and they all pointed to a terrifying possibility, the possibility that Lily was telling the truth. It was a Tuesday night, almost 2 weeks after the meeting at the bakery, when Arthur was in his office, surrounded by papers and reports scattered across the table in disorganized piles, when his cell phone rang. The sound made him jump, so absorbed was he in his notes. Unknown number. He answered, expecting it to be just another telemarketing call offering credit cards or health plans. "Mr. Arthur?" Lily's voice sounded small and scared on the other end, competing with background noises that seemed to be traffic. "I need help. Oscar is really mad. He locked me in a dark place and said I'm not getting out until I learn to keep quiet. He said I talked too much to you, that I ruined everything." Arthur was already getting up, knocking over papers in the process, searching for his car keys in his pockets. "Where are you? Can you give me any landmark?" "There's an old shed near a scrapyard. I can see red lights through the crack in the door. I think it's a sign from some shop or workshop." Arthur knew of only one major scrapyard in Oakhaven, Miller's scrapyard in the industrial zone. "Is it near Independence Avenue?" "I don't know the street names." Her voice was trembling now, and Arthur could hear that she was crying, trying to be brave, but failing. "But there's a lot of car noise, like a big avenue." "Okay, stay calm. I'm coming to get you. Don't hang up, you hear me? Stay on the line with me. Keep talking to me." Arthur ran to the parking lot, his shoes tapping loudly on the lobby's marble floor, got into his black Audi, and started driving while keeping Lily on the line, the phone wedged between his shoulder and ear as he drove faster than he should through the city streets. The girl was crying softly on the other end, trying to be brave but clearly terrified. He talked to her the whole way, asking simple questions about what she could see or hear, both to calm her down and to help him locate the exact spot. "Can you see through the crack in the door? What do you see? Can you hear anything specific besides the cars?" "There's a dog barking nearby," she said between sobs, "and I think there's a siren far away, and the smell, it smells like burnt rubber." It took almost 40 minutes, but Arthur finally found the shed. It was an abandoned structure at the back of the scrapyard, surrounded by scrap metal and wrecked cars piled up like a metallic cemetery. A terrible and dangerous place to leave a child alone, full of sharp edges and unstable surfaces. The door was locked with a rusty padlock that looked decades old. Arthur looked for something to break it, his hands rummaging through the scrap, finding an iron bar among the debris. 3 strong blows, using all his strength, and the padlock gave way with a satisfying snap. Inside the dark, fetid shed, smelling of mold and urine and worse things Arthur preferred not to identify, lit only by the light from Arthur's phone, Lily was huddled in a corner on a piece of dirty cardboard. When she saw Arthur, she ran to him with the speed of a bullet and threw herself into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably now, all pretense of courage abandoned. Arthur picked her up, feeling the thin little body tremble violently against his chest. She was so light, weighing less than she should. It had been so long since he had held a child like this. Memories of Leo and Chloe flooded his mind, bringing a sharp but also strangely comforting pain. The feeling of being needed, of having someone who needed him. "It's okay now, I've got you. You're safe," he murmured, stroking the girl's tangled hair, feeling his hand get dirty with sand and dry leaves caught in it. "No one is going to hurt you." Arthur took Lily to his apartment, a spacious 3-bedroom on the 12th floor of a luxury building downtown. It was the first time in 2 years that there was another person in that space that had become his personal mausoleum. The place was immaculate, thanks to the cleaning lady who came twice a week and cleaned an apartment that never got dirty because no one really lived there. But it was completely devoid of life. No personal objects in sight, no pictures on the walls. Arthur had put everything away after the accident, packed every memory into boxes that were locked in the guest room, unable to bear the constant reminders. The walls were white and bare, the furniture was minimalist and impersonal. It looked more like a hotel than a home. He prepared a bath for Lily in the guest suite's bathroom, adjusting the water temperature until it was warm but not too hot, finding clean, soft towels that had never been used in the closet drawer. He gave her a new lavender soap and a bottle of baby shampoo he inexplicably had, probably bought by mistake by the cleaning lady. When the girl emerged from the bathroom half an hour later, wrapped in a towel too big for her and wearing one of his old t-shirts that served as an improvised nightgown reaching her ankles, Arthur was struck by the transformation. Her curls, now clean and somewhat untangled, framed a delicate little face with cheekbones that were too prominent, clear evidence of prolonged malnutrition. But her eyes remained the same, large and too old for her young face. Arthur prepared a simple ham and cheese sandwich cut into small triangles as he remembered Chloe liked, and warm milk with chocolate mix. Lily ate slowly this time, small, careful bites, as if trying to make the food last, savoring every piece as if it could be the last. Afterwards, he took her to the guest room, a room that was never used but was always tidy, with a double bed covered in crisp white sheets, a tall, empty dresser, and grey curtains that blocked the city light outside. "You can sleep here tonight. Tomorrow we'll decide what to do." Lily looked at the bed as if she had never seen one before. Perhaps she really had never slept in a real bed with a soft mattress and feather pillows. She lay down on top of the covers, clearly unsure if she was allowed to get under them, her small body looking even smaller in that large bed. Arthur carefully pulled back the covers, lifting her slightly and then covering her properly. "Sleep. You're safe here. The door is locked. No one can get in. You're completely safe." But as he was about to leave the room, turning off the light and preparing to close the door, Lily's small voice called him from the darkness. "Mr. Arthur, do you still want to find your family?" "Yes, more than anything in the world." "Then I'll help. I'll remember everything I saw that day, every detail. I'll help you find them, I promise." Arthur felt a lump in his throat, an intense emotion he couldn't name. "Thank you, Lily. Now sleep. We'll talk more tomorrow." He left the door ajar and the hallway light on, instinctively knowing that a child who had been through so much trauma would need these small comforts, would need to know there was a way out, that she wasn't trapped, that the darkness wasn't complete. The next morning, Arthur woke up to a smell he hadn't experienced in 2 years. The smell of coffee, freshly brewed coffee. Confused, disoriented, he got out of bed, where he had slept surprisingly well for the first time in months, and went to the kitchen, following the aroma. There he found Lily on a chair she had dragged to the counter, trying to reach the coffee maker on the highest shelf. She had managed to make coffee, although half of it was spilled on the marble counter, dripping onto the floor in a brown puddle. "Sorry about the mess," she said quickly, when she saw Arthur, her hands automatically going behind her back as if expecting to be hit, afraid she was in trouble. I just wanted to help. Oscar always made me make coffee for him in the morning, said it had to be ready when he woke up or I'd get a beating. I thought you'd want some too. Arthur felt a wave of rage against Oscar, so intense that for a moment he saw red spots at the edge of his vision, but he forced himself to keep his voice calm and gentle. You don't have to do that here. You're a child, not a servant. Children don't have to make coffee or take care of adults. But thank you for the gesture. It was very kind of you. As they had breakfast together at the small kitchen table Arthur hadn't used in months, French bread with butter he had to defrost and fruit Arthur barely remembered having in the fridge, Lily began to recount more details about the day of the accident, small things that came to her mind in fragments. The man from the ambulance, she began, her eyes growing distant as she remembered. He seemed to know exactly what to do. He didn't seem scared or confused like I was. He didn't hesitate even once. It was almost as if he was expecting the accident to happen. What makes you say that? Arthur leaned forward, his attention completely focused on her now. The ambulance arrived really fast. Like really, really fast. The accident had just happened. The dust was still in the air, and it was already there. There was no time for someone to call and ask for help and for the ambulance to come from some distant hospital. It was like it was already nearby, waiting. And he went straight to the bus, as if he knew exactly which seat to look for, which people to grab. He didn't check on everyone. He just went straight, got those 3 people, and left. Arthur mentally noted this detail, his engineer's mind, accustomed to solving complex problems, beginning to form a picture. If there really was a conspiracy, and that was a huge assumption he wasn't completely ready to accept, someone had planned this in advance. But why? What would be the motive for someone to fake his family's death? What benefit would anyone gain from it? Money was the obvious answer. It was always money, but how would someone profit by keeping his family alive instead of dead? The life insurance had already been paid out. The inheritance, though not yet fully distributed due to bureaucratic issues, was destined for him as the surviving widower and some distant relatives. Over the next few weeks, Lily lived with Arthur. He told himself it was temporary, just until he found a suitable place for her, perhaps a decent shelter that would treat her well. But the truth was that the girl's presence had brought something back to his life. Not happiness exactly, but a purpose. Someone who needed him, someone to care for, a reason to wake up in the morning that wasn't just the empty habit of continuing to exist. He bought clothes for her, going to a children's store for the first time in years and feeling his heart ache at the sight of the shelves full of small clothes. He chose practical, comfortable pieces, but also some dresses, because every little girl deserves to have pretty dresses. He enrolled her in a public elementary school near the apartment, dealing with the bureaucracy and questions about documents that he circumvented with half-truths and a few calls to influential contacts. He established a routine that neither of them was used to, but that both desperately needed. For the first time in 2 years, Arthur had to wake up early for a reason other than mechanically going to work. He had to prepare a real breakfast with balanced nutrition. He had to pack a lunchbox with sandwiches and fruit. He had to make someone brush their teeth properly, comb their hair, wear clean clothes. And strangely, those mundane tasks began to heal him in a way that therapy and medication never had. There was something deeply human and necessary in caring for someone, in being useful, in having responsibilities that mattered. Lily adapted with an ease that was both comforting and deeply concerning. It was as if she was so desperate for stability and affection that she would accept any crumb given to her, too grateful to question or demand. She never asked for anything, never complained about anything, always trying to be helpful and pleasant and invisible. She made her bed with perfectly folded corners. She ate whatever was put in front of her without complaint. She did her homework without being reminded. Arthur realized she lived in constant fear of being sent away, of having that stability snatched from her. Every little mistake made her visibly tense, expecting punishment. "You don't have to be perfect," he told her one night when he found her crying silently in the bathroom because she had accidentally broken a water glass, holding the shards in her trembling hands. "Kids break things. They make messes. They forget homework. It's normal. You're not going to be sent away for that. You won't be punished. You're safe here." It was during one of these late-night talks, when Arthur was putting Lily to bed after another day that seemed almost normal, that she revealed something important. She was lying in bed, her eyes already half closed, when she murmured sleepily. The man from the ambulance had a name on his uniform: Oscar. Arthur, who was arranging the covers around her, froze completely. Even his breath stopped for a moment. "What? Are you sure?" Lily opened her eyes, more awake now, realizing the importance of what she had said. "Yes. I remember because later, when Oscar showed up at the police station to get me, I thought his name was familiar. But I was so little, like 3, that I didn't connect the dots back then. It's only now that I'm starting to remember, now that I'm sleeping better and having different nightmares." The revelation hit Arthur like a nuclear bomb. Oscar wasn't just some random exploiter who had taken advantage of Lily at a police station. He was involved in the accident from the beginning. He was the man from the ambulance. He had rescued Arthur's family, or kidnapped them, depending on how you looked at it. Then he had taken possession of the only witness, a child too young to be taken seriously, but who still represented a risk. Arthur began to investigate Oscar with renewed fervor. He hired a private investigator he knew, called in favors, used his position and resources to dig deep. He discovered that Oscar Ferrell had been an ambulance driver years ago, working for the municipal EMT service. But he had been fired 5 years ago for improper conduct. The exact details were hard to get, buried in administrative records no one wanted to share, but it seemed to involve some kind of fraud related to patient transport. Accusations of taking patients to specific private clinics in exchange for kickbacks instead of proper public hospitals. Nothing had been proven criminally, but the dismissal had happened nonetheless. Lily also began to remember more details as she spent more time in a safe environment. Her mind finally relaxed enough to process memories she had suppressed. Like how Oscar would sometimes get calls in the middle of the night and leave in a hurry, muttering something about patience. How he kept documents locked in an old briefcase he stored under his bed in the shack where they sometimes stayed. How he mentioned a brother who worked at some kind of private clinic, always with a tone of resentment mixed with fear. Arthur knew he needed to act carefully. If there really was a conspiracy, and every day that passed brought more evidence that there was, he couldn't just confront Oscar, or he would alert whoever was behind it. It could put his family in danger. If they were indeed alive, he needed concrete evidence, a solid plan, professional help. That's when he decided to hire a private investigator. Anthony Ramos was a former police officer who now worked as a private detective, recommended by a lawyer friend of Arthur's who dealt with corporate matters. A serious man in his 60s with completely white hair but a still strong body, with over 3 decades of experience in investigations both in the police force and the private sector. Anthony had a small but organized office in an old commercial building, walls covered with certificates and photos from his time as a police officer. He listened more than he spoke, taking careful notes in surprisingly elegant handwriting. Arthur told Anthony everything. About the accident, about Lily, about Oscar, about all the inconsistencies he had discovered in the official report. He expected the investigator to think he was crazy, to laugh, or at least raise a skeptical eyebrow. But Anthony just listened attentively, taking notes in a leather-bound notebook, occasionally asking specific questions about dates and details. "I've seen stranger things," was all Anthony said when Arthur finished his account. "I'll start by investigating Oscar Ferrell. Let's see what dirt we can dig up. Men like him always leave a trail." Meanwhile, Arthur's life with Lily continued, taking on an almost surreal normality. The girl was adapting well to school, although teachers reported that she was overly quiet and had difficulty interacting with other children. At the parent-teacher conference Arthur attended, his first time in a school in years, the teacher explained that Lily was academically brilliant, absorbing information with impressive speed, but socially withdrawn. "She flinches when someone raises their voice," the teacher said with concern, "and she apologizes for things that don't need apologies. Yesterday she apologized for coughing. It's a behavior we see in children who have suffered abuse." It wasn't surprising, given everything she had been through. Arthur began looking for child therapists specializing in trauma, scheduling sessions, doing what he could to help her heal. Arthur also noticed strange behaviors in Lily that went beyond the obvious trauma. Sometimes she talked to herself, but not like a normal child playing make-believe with imaginary friends. It was as if she were having complete conversations with someone invisible, answering questions no one had asked, laughing at jokes no one had told. When asked, she would change the subject or pretend not to know what he was talking about, her eyes becoming evasive. One night, Arthur woke up to noises coming from Lily's room. It was almost 3 in the morning. When he went to check, he found her sitting on the floor surrounded by drawings, dozens of them scattered on the floor in an almost circular pattern, all made with crayons he had bought for her, and they all showed variations of the same scene. A bus on fire, a white ambulance, stick figures being carried, trees all around, a sky red with fire. "Lily, are you okay?" Arthur asked softly, not wanting to scare her, kneeling beside her on the soft rug. The girl looked at him with eyes that didn't seem to really see him, glazed over at something beyond him. "I was trying to remember more things. Drawing helps. But the more I draw, the more I remember, and the more I remember, the more I want to forget." Arthur sat on the floor beside her, his back against the bed, picking up one of the drawings. The drawing was simple, as expected from a small child, but there was something disturbing in the scene depicted, the details a 4-year-old child shouldn't remember. The exact way the flames rose, the broken windows of the bus, the figures on stretchers with dangling arms. "You don't have to force yourself to remember. You don't have to do this alone. It's not your responsibility. But I promise to help you find your family. Lily, you've already helped me so much, more than you can imagine, and it's not your responsibility to carry this burden. You're a child. Let the adults handle the difficult things." The girl looked at him with tears in her eyes, and for the first time Arthur saw real vulnerability there, instead of the forced strength she usually displayed. "But if I don't help, who will? I'm the only one who saw, the only one who knows the truth. If I don't speak, if I don't remember, maybe no one will ever know what really happened." Arthur pulled her into a hug, feeling the trembling little body against his heart breaking for this child who had carried such a heavy burden for so long. "Then we'll find out together, okay? But in your own way, in your own time, no pressure. When you want to stop, we'll stop. Deal? Deal." It was Anthony who brought the next big discovery a few weeks later. He had managed to track Oscar's financial movements through some methods that were probably not entirely legal, but that Arthur decided not to question, and had discovered something interesting. Regular payments, always on the 15th of each month, coming from a business account registered in the name of the Clearwater Clinic. Significant amounts too, $2,000 a month for the past 2 years. It's a private clinic on the outskirts of the city. Anthony explained during a meeting in Arthur's office, spreading printed documents across the table. Specializing in the treatment of psychological trauma and neurological disorders. Very expensive, very exclusive, the kind of place that treats patients who can pay any amount for absolute privacy and discretion. They don't accept insurance plans, only direct private payment. And what does Oscar have to do with it? Officially, nothing. He doesn't work there according to employee records, has no apparent relationship with the clinic in public records. But these monthly payments have been happening for 2 years. They started exactly 3 weeks after the accident that killed your family, or supposedly killed them. Arthur felt his heart accelerate, beating so hard that he put his hand on his chest as if that could calm it down. Do you think my family could be there, at the clinic? I don't know for sure yet, but there's definitely some connection worth investigating, and there's more. Anthony pulled out another document, this one looking like a birth certificate or something similar. The clinic is owned by a doctor named Dr. Alistair Finch, a psychiatrist by training, specializing in memory recovery therapies. And I found out that Alistair Finch has a brother, 3 years younger, full name Oscar Finch Ferrell. Everything started to fit together in a terrifying way, like pieces of a macabre puzzle. Oscar wasn't just some random opportunist who had profited from a tragedy. He was involved from the beginning, working with his doctor brother who ran a private clinic. But why? What was the ultimate goal? Why kidnap survivors of an accident and fake their deaths? I need to get into that clinic, Arthur said with determination, his hands clenching into fists on the table. I need to see with my own eyes. It's not that simple, Anthony warned him, his voice cautious. The place is extremely secure according to my preliminary investigation. Security cameras in every hallway, armed guards at the entrance, fully controlled access with card and biometric systems, and they are very, very careful about patient privacy. I couldn't even get a list of who's admitted there, the kind of medical secrecy that is practically impenetrable without a court order. There has to be a way. Anthony thought for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. Maybe there is. The clinic occasionally accepts visits from family members interested in seeing the facilities before admitting someone. They give guided tours, show the rooms, the therapy rooms, try to impress potential wealthy clients. You could pretend to be looking for treatment for a relative with severe psychological trauma, someone who needs intensive care and absolute privacy. That's what Arthur did. Using a different phone from his personal cell, he scheduled a visit to the Clearwater Clinic, presenting himself as someone looking for treatment for an imaginary sister with severe post-traumatic stress disorder after a car accident that had left her with memory gaps and paralyzing anxiety. The secretary who answered was polite and efficient, her voice soft and professional. She asked a few questions about the severity of the case, about the ability to pay, and scheduled a visit for the following Thursday at 10 in the morning. When the day came, Arthur dressed carefully. A dark grey but not black suit, expensive but not ostentatious. He wanted to look like someone with resources but not draw too much attention. He drove to the clinic with hands that trembled slightly on the steering wheel. The Clearwater Clinic was located in a wooded area on the outskirts of Oak Haven, far from the noise and pollution of the city, surrounded by high concrete walls painted beige and impeccably manicured gardens, with colorful flowers and bushes trimmed into perfect geometric shapes. The main building was impressively modern, all mirrored glass and white concrete, 3 stories of contemporary architecture designed to look more like a luxury spa hotel than a medical institution. A decorative fountain with koi fish was running at the entrance. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers. Dr. Alistair Finch received him personally in the lobby, which looked more like a 5-star hotel lobby than a hospital's. He was a man in his 50s, maybe 55, with grey hair perfectly combed back with some kind of expensive gel, designer frame glasses that probably cost more than many people's monthly salary. He wore an immaculate white lab coat over a suit that Arthur recognized as being from an Italian designer, probably costing around $5,000. His handshake was firm, but not crushing, his smile professional and practiced, showing teeth whitened by expensive dental treatments. "Mr. Vance, it's a pleasure to have you. I understand you're looking for treatment for your sister. The secretary mentioned something about trauma related to a car accident." Arthur went along with the rehearsed story, describing fictitious symptoms carefully based on research he had done online. He talked about recurring nightmares, short-term memory loss, paralyzing anxiety, inability to live a normal life. Fabricated concerns, but based on enough medical reality to sound convincing. Dr. Finch listened attentively, asking pertinent questions about the duration of symptoms, whether he had tried other therapies, if she was on medication. He demonstrated exactly the right level of professional empathy. Concerned, but not overly emotional. Competent, but not arrogant. He was clearly very good at what he did. Whatever it was, he did exactly. During the tour of the facilities, walking through impeccably clean corridors, decorated with modern art on the walls, Arthur tried to absorb every detail while pretending to be just casually interested. Spacious and comfortable rooms, looking more like boutique hotel suites than hospital rooms. Hospital beds disguised with expensive covers, flat-screen TVs, private bathrooms with rain-effect showers, therapy rooms equipped with the most modern technology, including equipment Arthur didn't recognize, but that looked expensive and sophisticated. Quiet gardens for supervised walks with wooden benches under shady trees and small decorative sculptures. Everything very impressive, very expensive, very controlled. There were cameras at every corner, discreet but present. Staff in immaculate uniforms who looked more like security guards than nurses passed by frequently. Doors with electronic locks that required access cards. It was when they were passing through a less busy corridor on the second floor, an area Dr. Finch described as more intensive treatment wings for special cases, that Arthur saw her. Just for a second, maybe two, through a half-open door. A woman with her back to him, sitting in a chair near a room's window, her brown hair falling in waves over her shoulders, exactly the length Eleanor used to keep it. The erect but relaxed posture, the way she held a book in her hands, the long, thin fingers, all too familiar. Arthur stopped abruptly in the hallway, so abruptly that he almost tripped over his own feet, his heart nearly leaping out of his mouth. It couldn't be. Not after 2 years of searching, not after everything. But at the same time, every fiber of his being recognized that silhouette. "Is there a problem, Mr. Vance?" Dr. Finch's voice cut through his thoughts, gentle but with a hint of curiosity. No, just..." Arthur struggled to regain his composure. "That patient there, she reminded me of someone." Dr. Finch's smile didn't waver a millimeter, perfectly practiced, but something changed in his eyes. An almost imperceptible hardening, a calculation happening behind that professional gaze. "Ah, yes. Patient privacy is our top priority here, you understand. We cannot discuss individual cases in any way. Absolute medical confidentiality is a fundamental part of what we offer." He gently but firmly guided Arthur away from that area, his hand on Arthur's elbow with subtle but definite pressure, continuing the tour through other parts of the clinic. But Arthur was barely paying attention now, answering questions automatically. His brain was in a whirlwind. That woman. He hadn't been able to see her face, just a fleeting glimpse of her back, but every fiber of his being screamed that it was Eleanor. When the tour ended, they returned to Dr. Finch's luxurious office on the first floor, all dark wood and leather, with framed diplomas on the walls, and a view of the impeccable gardens. Dr. Finch accompanied him there, providing informational brochures printed on thick, high-quality paper and his personal card on vellum paper with gold embossed letters. If you decide our clinic is suitable for your sister, I would be happy to discuss a personalized treatment plan. Our methods are quite effective, especially in cases of severe trauma and memory disorders related to traumatic accidents. The choice of words did not go unnoticed by Arthur. Memory disorders, traumatic accidents, as if Dr. Finch knew exactly why he was really there, as if he were sending a coded message. Or maybe Arthur was seeing connections where there were none, his desperate mind creating patterns in the chaos. Arthur left the clinic with his hands shaking so much he could barely hold the steering wheel, having to sit in the parking lot for a full 10 minutes before trusting himself to drive. He called Anthony immediately, his voice coming out hurried and breathless. "I saw her, or I think I saw her, a woman who could be Eleanor. I need to be sure. I need to see that woman's face." "Let's take it easy," Anthony advised from the other end of the line, his voice the anchor of rationality Arthur needed. "If it really is your wife and if they're keeping her there for some reason, we can't just storm the place. That would put her in danger and ruin any legal case we might build. We need a careful plan. We need evidence that holds up in court." But Arthur was beyond reason at that point, beyond logic and careful planning. 2 years of pain, 2 years of grief, 2 years of an empty life, all leading to this moment. He returned home, where Lily was waiting for him after her school day, doing homework at the kitchen table, her tongue sticking out in concentration as she practiced writing the alphabet. The girl immediately sensed that something was wrong, that sharp intuition that traumatized children. Develop to read moods and dangers. "What happened? Did you find them?" Arthur told her about the clinic, about the tour, about the woman he had seen through the door, about Dr. Finch and his connection to Oscar. Lily listened to everything with a seriousness too profound for a 4-year-old child, her eyes growing wider and wider. "I knew it," she whispered when he finished, her small hands clenching into fists on the table. "I knew I saw them being taken away alive. I didn't make it up, I didn't dream it. It was real, everything was real." Over the next few days, Arthur and Anthony worked on a plan. They needed concrete evidence before they could act, before they could call the authorities or do anything that would alert Dr. Finch. Anthony had some contacts who could help them obtain information about the clinic's patients, ethical hackers who worked on private investigation cases, but it would be risky and would take time. It was Lily who suggested the most direct solution. They were having dinner, spaghetti with tomato sauce that Arthur had cooked, and which was reasonable but not excellent, when she said casually, "Oscar has keys to the clinic. I've seen them. He goes there sometimes in the middle of the night, always on Mondays and Thursdays, around 2 in the morning." Arthur stopped with his fork in midair. "How do you know that?" "Because sometimes I would stay awake when I lived with him. He thought I was sleeping, but I heard everything. I was afraid to sleep deeply because I never knew when he was going to get angry. He would talk on the phone to someone, always whispering like it was a conspiracy, saying he was going to check on the patients. He always took a specific set of keys, different from his other keys, a set with a red tag tied to it. Arthur knew that what he was considering was completely illegal and potentially very dangerous. Trespassing, breaking and entering, possibly compromising evidence that could be used legally later. But the possibility that his family was alive, so close, just a few miles away, being held prisoner while he did nothing, was absolutely unbearable. "Do you know where Oscar keeps these keys?" Lily nodded confidently. "In his shack, inside that old brown briefcase. He always locks with a padlock. The same one where he keeps money and some papers he doesn't want anyone to see." Gaining access to Oscar's shack proved easier than they expected. The man had a routine too predictable for someone involved in a criminal conspiracy. Anthony confirmed this through basic surveillance over a week, meticulously noting Oscar's movements. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, he would leave around 8 and go to Joe's Dive Bar, a low-class bar on the outskirts where he would drink cheap whiskey until it closed around midnight, then stumble home and pass out, like clockwork. The following Tuesday, while Oscar was sitting on his usual stool at the bar, already on his 4th shot of whiskey according to the spotter Anthony had posted there, Arthur and Anthony entered the shack. It was an even more deplorable place than Arthur had imagined. A makeshift structure of wood and tin sheets in an irregular settlement without proper sanitation. Dirty, disorganized, smelling of mold, old alcohol, urine, and decay. Dirty clothes scattered on the dirt floor. Empty bottles piled in corners. A thin, stained mattress on the floor without sheets. A single bare light bulb hanging from a dangerously exposed wire. Arthur felt physically nauseated at the thought that Lily had been forced to live there in those degrading conditions, that a 4-year-old child slept there, ate there, suffered there. They found the briefcase under the dirty mattress, exactly where Lily had said it would be. The lock was old, rusty, and Anthony managed to pick it quickly with proper tools he carried in a black leather bag, prompting questions about where he learned those skills. Inside, there were yellowed and folded documents, a few wads of cash in crumpled bills of various values, totaling maybe $3,000, and yes, a set of keys with a faded red tag tied with string. But it was another item in the briefcase that made Arthur freeze completely, his heart stopping for 3 whole beats before starting up again with triple force. Photos, dozens of them, faded Polaroid pictures and photos printed on photo paper of varying quality, photos of patients from the clinic, documenting he didn't know what, but including 3 faces he recognized immediately even through the tears that blurred his vision and streamed uncontrollably down his face. Eleanor, Leo, Chloe. They were alive, truly, undoubtedly alive. The photos were recent, some with dates written on the back, taken at different times over the past 2 years, documenting what progress, deterioration. Arthur didn't know. But the photos showed his family in various settings within the clinic, sitting in chairs, lying in beds, looking out the window. Eleanor looked different, thinner, her cheeks a little sunken, hair longer than she used to keep it, with a vacant expression in her eyes that he had never seen before, as if she were looking at something very far away. The children had grown visibly, their faces losing some of the childish roundness of 8-year-olds, beginning to show the contours they would have as pre-teens. Leo was taller, thinner. Chloe had cut her hair short when it had always been long before, but they were undoubtedly his children. He would recognize those faces anywhere, under any circumstances. Arthur fell to his knees right there on the filthy floor of the squalid shack, sobbing with relief and anger mixed in equal proportions. 2 years. 2 damned years of mourning, of unbearable pain, of an empty life, of visiting an empty grave every week, of crying alone in a silent apartment. And his family was alive the whole time, held prisoner in a clinic, less than 10 miles away. Anthony helped him up after a few minutes, his strong hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Let's go. We need to get out of here before he comes back, and we need to think very carefully and cautiously about the next step. Now that we have evidence, we have to do this right." They took the photos and the keys, and also all the documents from the briefcase, leaving only the money exactly as they found it, so Oscar wouldn't immediately suspect someone had rummaged through his things. Back at Arthur's apartment, with Lily already asleep in her room after a normal school day that now seemed surreal given what they had discovered, the 2 men spread the photos across the dining room table and studied each one meticulously. There was a pattern. The photos were always taken on the same day of the month, the 15th, probably corresponding to the days when Oscar received his mysterious payment. Documentation of what? Proof that the patients were still alive and admitted? An insurance record in case Dr. Finch tried to cheat him? Why? Arthur asked aloud, more to himself than to Anthony, though he said the words out loud. Why would anyone do this? Kidnap my family, fake their deaths, keep them prisoner for 2 years? For what? What's the benefit in that? Money, Anthony answered immediately, his voice holding the certainty of decades investigating crimes. It's always money in the end. Somehow they're profiting from this. The question is figuring out exactly how. But how? Arthur wasn't paying anything. No one had demanded a ransom. No one had made contact. It made no sense at all. The answer came from an unexpected source a few days later. Anthony received information from one of his contacts who worked investigating insurance fraud, a former police colleague who now worked for one of the major insurance companies. Apparently, there was a suspicious pattern of payments related to the Clearwater Clinic. They have an ingenious scheme, Anthony explained during an urgent meeting at Arthur's apartment, spreading printed documents across the kitchen table. Patients registered under false or partially false names. Desperate family members paying fortunes for experimental memory and trauma recovery treatments. But here's the truly diabolical trick. They keep some patients in perpetual treatment. They never fully cure them, always promising that the next therapy, the next medication, the next experimental treatment will work, and they continue to charge absurd amounts monthly, $50,000, $100,000 a month in some cases. But no one is paying for my family's treatment. I thought they were dead. Exactly. You're not paying. But what if I told you someone is? Anthony pulled out another document, this one looking like an insurance policy with a lot of fine print. Your family life insurance had a special clause, do you remember? Extended coverage for prolonged medical treatment in cases of severe trauma or disabling injuries resulting from accidents covered by the policy. Arthur vaguely remembered signing those documents years ago when he took out the insurance through a broker who was an old college friend. He had never paid much attention to the details, trusting the broker, just signing where indicated. It was just insurance, something you had, hoping you'd never need to use. The insurance company paid out the death benefit to you as the designated beneficiary, but it also opened another separate process related to accident victims who theoretically survived but required prolonged medical treatment due to severe neurological and psychological trauma. This second process was never finalized or closed. And guess which clinic is listed as the authorized service provider for neurological trauma treatment? The magnitude of the fraud began to become clear to Arthur, like an image slowly forming on photographic paper in a developing solution. Oscar and Dr. Finch had set up an elaborate and diabolical scheme. Rescue survivors of serious accidents who would have little chance of being visually identified or actively sought. Declare their deaths officially while keeping them alive in treatment at the private clinic. Bill the insurance companies for extremely expensive and perpetual treatments that never ended, while simultaneously benefiting from the death payouts to the families who thought their loved ones were dead. How many people? Arthur asked, feeling true nausea rising in his throat. How many other victims are there? I'm still investigating the exact numbers, but from the documents I've been able to access, it seems there are at least a dozen, maybe even 15 patients at the clinic in similar situations to your families. People who officially died in accidents, but who are alive and being held there indefinitely. The anger Arthur felt at that moment was unlike anything he had ever experienced in his entire life. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger that burns fast and extinguishes itself. It was something cold, calculated, relentless. It wasn't just about his own family anymore. It was about all those people, all those families shattered by pure and simple greed. People who had mourned loved ones who weren't really dead. People who had been deliberately emotionally tortured for years to enrich two unscrupulous men. Lily, who had woken up and come downstairs without them noticing, drawn by the voices, was standing at the kitchen entrance in her new starry pajamas. Arthur didn't know how long she had been standing there listening. "I heard you talking," she said with her small but firm voice. "They're very bad, aren't they? Oscar and his brother. They do bad things to a lot of people. It's not just your family. It's a lot of people." Arthur motioned for her to come closer. Lily came walking barefoot on the cold floor and sat on his lap, something she rarely did, usually keeping some physical distance. But now she snuggled against his chest, seeking comfort, or perhaps offering it. "Lily, do you remember anything else about Oscar? Anything that could help us? About how he works? About what he does at the clinic? Any detail?" The girl thought for a long moment, her forehead wrinkling in concentration. "He's afraid of his brother. Once I heard him talking on the phone. He was crying and sounded really scared. He was saying things like, 'I did what you told me, and please don't do this to me, and I need this money. You don't understand.' I think Dr. Finch is the one in charge of everything. Oscar is like the helper who does the dirty work." It made sense. Dr. Finch was clearly the mastermind behind the operation, using his older but less intelligent brother as a helper for the dirtier parts of the job. The rescue of survivors, the forgery of documents, the elimination of potential witnesses like Lily. Over the following weeks, Arthur, Anthony, and even Lily, when appropriate, worked together to gather more evidence. Arthur used the stolen keys to enter the clinic in the middle of the night on 2 different occasions, accompanied by Anthony and equipped with small hidden cameras. They were risky operations that left Arthur in a cold sweat, every noise in the dark hallway making his heart jump. But they managed to take pictures of fraudulent medical records, financial documents showing the billing schemes, patient records under false names, everything they could find without being detected by the security cameras that Anthony had managed to map out during his first guided tour. It was during one of these nighttime incursions, the second one, about 3 weeks after they found the photos in Oscar's shack, that Arthur finally saw Eleanor for real and up close. He was in the second-floor hallway, photographing documents in a file room that Oscar sometimes used, when he heard footsteps. He froze, his heart nearly stopping. But it was just a nurse making her nightly rounds, and she passed his hiding spot without noticing. When the hallway fell silent again, Arthur found the courage to go to the room he knew was Eleanor's from the records he had photographed. Room 237. The door was unlocked. He entered as quietly as possible, every creak of the floor making him tremble. Eleanor was sleeping in the hospital bed, disguised as a hotel bed. The soft city light coming through the window illuminated her face. Arthur stood there by the bed for long minutes, just looking at the face he loved. More than anything in the world, she looked so much the same and so different at the same time, the same delicate features, the same shape of her lips, but there were lines on her face that weren't there before, a permanent frown between her eyebrows that suggested constant confusion, and even while sleeping, she seemed restless, moving, muttering unintelligible things. Arthur desperately wanted to wake her up, to hug her, to take her away from there immediately, to grab Leo and Chloe from their rooms and just run. But he knew that doing so could ruin everything. It could alert Dr. Finch, who could destroy evidence or move the patients. It could compromise any legal case they might build. So he just stood there, memorizing every detail of her face, fighting back tears that threatened to fall. Then, forcing himself to be practical, he took several pictures with the hidden camera as additional evidence that she was alive and there. Before leaving, he couldn't resist. He lightly touched her hand that rested on the blanket. Eleanor stirred slightly at the touch but didn't wake up, and Arthur whispered so low it was barely audible. "I'm going to get you. Out of here. I promise. Just a little longer." The evidence they accumulated over weeks of obsessive investigation was substantial and damning. Documents showing multiple insurance frauds involving at least 15 different patients over 5 years, patient records under false names or partially altered identities, forged medical records, photos proving that people declared dead were alive and admitted, and perhaps most shockingly, proof that Dr. Finch was administering unauthorized treatments that actually had the opposite objective of what was stated. Instead of healing traumas and restoring memories, he was actively erasing memories through a combination of potent psychotropic drugs and modified shock therapies. Patients became confused, disoriented, their memories of their former lives progressively destroyed until they no longer knew who they were. Arthur became physically ill when he read the details of the treatments, imagining Eleanor and his children being subjected to that. But the most shocking discovery came when Lily, in one of her spontaneous remembering sessions that she insisted on doing, drew something new on a Saturday afternoon. It wasn't the scene of the accident this time, it was a face. A woman, clearly an adult based on the details Lily could capture, with long hair and large eyes, features similar to Lily's. "Who is she?" Arthur asked gently, sitting on the floor next to Lily, who was surrounded by crayons. Lily looked at the drawing with a confused, almost surprised expression, as if her own hands had created something her brain hadn't authorized. "I don't know, but sometimes I dream about her, a pretty lady who calls me Sophia and says she misses me, that she loves me, that she'll find me one day." Sophia, not Lily. Arthur felt a shiver run down his spine, starting at the nape of his neck and descending to the base of his spine. "Is that your real name, Sophia?" The girl blinked, looking genuinely confused by the very answer she was about to give. I think so, but I'm not sure. Sometimes I'm Lily, sometimes I'm Sophia. It all gets mixed up in my head, like when you wake up and you don't know if the dream was real or if the real was a dream." Arthur showed the drawing to Anthony the next day. "Can you investigate if there's a missing woman who might match this description and has some connection to the clinic? Maybe a former employee, a former patient, anything?" It took 3 days of intensive investigation, but Anthony found something. A former employee of the Clearwater Clinic named Lucy Morgan had disappeared about 3 years ago in April 2021. She had worked there as a nurse for 2 years before disappearing, and public records showed that Lucy had a 1-year-old daughter at the time of her disappearance, a girl born in March 2020, registered name Sophia Morgan. Even more shockingly, Lucy had filed a formal complaint against the clinic with the State Board of Nursing just 2 weeks before she disappeared, alleging questionable medical practices and possible fraud related to patient treatments. The complaint was never properly investigated because Lucy simply vanished before she could present more evidence or testimony. The case was filed as a missing person with no leads. "Do you think the woman in Sophia's drawing, is her mother?" Arthur asked, though he already knew the answer in his heart. "More than that. I think Lucy Morgan is in the clinic, as an involuntary patient. If she was threatening to expose their scheme, Dr. Finch would have to eliminate her somehow. And what better way than to turn her into one of his perpetual victims?" That revelation changed everything. Lily wasn't just a random witness who had seen the accident. She was a victim of the same scheme, separated from her mother when she was a 1-year-old baby, too young to remember clearly, but old enough for fragments of memory to remain like ghosts in her mind. Handed over to Oscar when she was too small to be a reliable witness about anything. Kept as, what? Insurance? A way to control Lucy in case she recovered her memories and wanted to escape. Arthur sat with Lily and explained everything. They had discovered gently but honestly because she deserved the truth. The girl listened in absolute silence, silent tears rolling down her small face, falling into her lap. So my real name is Sophia, and I have a mother who's alive? Who was looking for me? We believe so. And we're going to find her, just like we're going to rescue my family. All of them. We're going to end this once and for all. Sophia, as she immediately asked to be called from that moment on, reclaiming her real name as an act of resistance, became even more determined to help. Her memory, perhaps freed by the knowledge of her true identity and the meaning of her fragmented memories, began to reveal more details. She remembered a gentle woman with a soft voice who sang lullabies in English. She remembered being rocked in warm, safe arms. She remembered the smell of lavender and something else she couldn't identify, but that made her feel safe. She remembered being taken from a safe, warm place, of a woman's screams and protests that she now understood to be her mother's, into the chaos of street life with Oscar. She remembered fragments of conversations that now made sense. Oscar on the phone saying, "The child is under control, she won't be a problem." Oscar muttering drunkenly about how that meddling nurse got what she deserved. Now she'll spend the rest of her life not even remembering her own name. The pieces of the puzzle finally fit together completely, forming a clear and absolutely terrifying picture. Dr. Finch had eliminated the threat that Lucy represented by forcibly admitting her to his own clinic, probably under some fabricated diagnosis, erasing her memories through his cruel treatments until she no longer remembered her life, her daughter, her complaints. And he had then handed Sophia, too young to be a reliable witness about anything, to his brother Oscar to take care of, keeping her as collateral in case Lucy ever began to recover her memories. With all the evidence gathered, meticulously organized into folders by Anthony, with the precision of decades of police experience, Arthur knew it was time to act. But he couldn't just take everything to the local police without guarantees. Dr. Finch was a rich and influential man. He had expensive lawyers. He had political connections evident from the way he had operated with impunity for years. A poorly filed complaint could be hushed up, evidence could disappear, witnesses could be silenced. Arthur had seen it happen in business circles too many times to blindly trust the system. Anthony suggested involving the press first. A well-documented public scandal is harder to cover up than a quiet police investigation. If we can get an investigative journalist from one of the big New York papers, someone with a reputation and resources, we can expose this nationally before Finch has a chance to cover his tracks. But before they could implement this plan, before they could even contact reliable journalists, something unexpected happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Arthur received a call from an unknown number from Oakhaven. The voice on the other end was female, nervous, whispering as if afraid of being overheard. "Mr. Vance? My name is Patricia. I've worked as a nurse at the Clearwater Clinic for 4 years. I need to talk to you urgently. It's about your family." Arthur felt his heart instantly accelerate, beating so hard it physically hurt. "How do you know about my family? How did you get my number?" "I know who they really are. I recognized your wife when you visited the clinic weeks ago. I saw your picture in old news reports when I researched the accident. I know what Dr. Finch is doing, and I can't stay silent and complicit in this anymore. But I need guarantees, protection. If he finds out I talked to you, I'll end up like Lucy, or worse." They arranged to meet at a discreet cafe far from the clinic in the southern part of the city where no one Patricia knew frequented. Arthur arrived early, nervous, with Anthony sitting at a separate table pretending to read a newspaper, but actually watching for danger. Patricia was a woman in her 40s, with brown hair showing streaks of grey, visibly stressed and scared. Her hands trembled as she held a cup of coffee she didn't even drink. She constantly looked at the door as if expecting Dr. Finch to appear at any moment. She confirmed everything Arthur and Anthony had discovered, and more. The insurance fraud schemes, the patients held indefinitely, the memory-erasing treatments, and she revealed specific details about Dr. Finch's protocols. "Dr. Finch doesn't do this alone," she revealed, her voice barely above a whisper. "He has contacts in different public hospitals in the region and at the coroner's office, corrupt doctors, administrative staff, even some police officers. They're the ones who help identify accident victims who can be utilized for the scheme. People without much close family who might ask difficult questions, or in situations where visual identification would be impossible due to burns or severe trauma." "And the treatments? What exactly does he do to the patients?" Patricia visibly flinched, clearly ashamed of her passive complicity in all of it. Tears began to stream silently down her face. "He uses a combination of high-potency psychotropic drugs, not approved, for use in the way he administers them, and modified electroconvulsive therapies that basically erase their memories progressively, deliberately damaging the hippocampus and other areas responsible for long-term memory." She paused, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. "The patients become confused, disoriented. They lose recent memories first, then midterm memories, eventually even fundamental memories of who they are. He tells families when there's contact that it's part of the original trauma, that it will eventually get better with the expensive treatments he offers. But he's actually ensuring they never remember their previous lives, keeping them in a state of perpetual confusion and dependency." "That's monstrous." Arthur could barely control his anger, his hands clenching into fists so tight his nails dug into his palms. "Absolutely monstrous." I know. And for a long time I convinced myself it wasn't my responsibility, that I was just a nurse following orders from the supervising doctor, that I had no power to do anything. But I can't stand to see those people suffering anymore, especially after I saw what he did to little Sophia and her mother. "You know Lucy. Is she at the clinic? Can you confirm that?" Patricia nodded miserably. "She is. Room 312 on the 3rd floor, in the long-term intensive care wing. But she doesn't remember almost anything now. She thinks her name is Mariana, that she was never married, that she never had children. Dr. Finch has destroyed her memories so completely in the last 3 years that she doesn't even question her situation anymore. She accepts what they say about who she is as absolute truth." Sophia, who was anxiously waiting in the car with strict instructions to stay there, would be absolutely shattered to hear this. Her mother alive, but so damaged she didn't remember having a daughter. But Patricia also brought hope along with the horrifying revelations. The effects can be reversed. Not completely, probably never completely, but significantly. If the patients are taken off the medications Finch uses and receive proper trauma recovery therapy, there's a real chance of recovery. It won't be easy, and they may never be exactly as they were before what they suffered, but they can recover many of their memories and identities with time and correct treatment. Arthur felt a wave of relief mixed with renewed determination. There was hope then, not just of rescuing his family, but of having them back for real. Not just living bodies, but complete people with their memories, their personalities, their lives. "I'll need you to testify. Officially, document everything you know, sign sworn affidavits. Are you willing to do that?" Patricia hesitated, fear visible in her eyes, then she nodded slowly. Yes, I'll testify, but I need protection. My daughter is 15, she depends on me. If something happens to me..." "Nothing will happen," Anthony intervened, joining them at the table. "We'll do this right, with all the correct authorities involved. You and your family will have full protection." Arthur decided it was time to act decisively. With Patricia as an internal eyewitness willing to testify and all the documentary evidence they had gathered, they went to the authorities. Not the local police who might have been compromised by Dr. Finch, but straight to the FBI in New York and the federal prosecutor's office. They presented the entire case meticulously, every document, every photo, every recorded testimony. The federal prosecutors were visibly shocked by the magnitude and duration of the scheme. Cases like this, operating with impunity for years, were exactly the type of institutionalized corruption they wanted to eliminate. The official investigation began quickly, but with total discretion. Warrants were prepared in secret. A rescue operation was mounted with meticulous care by a determined federal prosecutor named Robert Andrews, who was personally outraged by the case. It took almost a month of preparation, an agonizing month where Arthur had to continue living his normal life, knowing his family was so close, yet still so inaccessible. But finally, in the early hours of a Tuesday morning, 3 months and 1 week after Arthur had first set foot in the Clearwater Clinic, pretending to seek treatment for a non-existent sister, dozens of federal agents raided the site. The operation was codenamed Operation Lost Memory and took place simultaneously at several locations: at the clinic, at Dr. Alistair Finch's residence, at Oscar's shack, in the offices of several doctors and administrative staff who were part of the corruption network. Arthur was there when it all happened, not as an active participant, but as an observer, along with Sophia, who had insisted on being present, despite Arthur initially thinking it would be too traumatic for her. "It's my mom," she had said with impressive determination for a 4-year-old. "I need to be there when they find her." Dr. Alistair Finch was arrested in his room, trying to destroy documents in his fireplace. Oscar Farrell was found drunk in his shack, so intoxicated he barely resisted arrest. Several others were detained. Corrupt employees in 3 different hospitals were arrested. 2 medical examiners from the coroner's office who had falsified autopsy reports were taken into custody. The clinic's patients, all 16 who were identified as victims of the scheme, were all transferred to legitimate and reputable medical institutions where they would receive proper treatment under federal supervision. Arthur was there, standing in the clinic's impeccable garden as the controlled chaos unfolded, when Eleanor was brought out. She was in a wheelchair, pushed by a compassionate nurse who was not part of the criminal scheme, wearing a simple hospital gown, pale and clearly confused by the noise and activity around her. She looked at Arthur as she passed, her eyes meeting his for a long moment. But there was no recognition there, no flicker of memory or connection, just confusion, maybe a little fear. She looked at him the same way she would look at any stranger. It was the most painful thing Arthur had ever experienced. More painful even than believing they were dead, because now they were there, physically present, alive and breathing. But they didn't know who he was. His wife of 15 years of marriage looked at him as if she had never seen him before in her life. She didn't remember his face, his name, anything they had shared. Leo and Chloe, now 10 years old, were brought out shortly after, both equally disoriented and confused. Held gently by trained social workers, their faces showed the same vacant confusion that Eleanor exhibited. Arthur wanted to run to them, to hug them, to scream that he was their father, that he loved them, that he had never stopped looking for them. But he knew that would only scare them more. They didn't know him. To them, he was a stranger. Sophia went through the same devastating experience when she was reunited with Lucy moments later. The woman looked at the daughter she hadn't seen in 3 years with distant, confused politeness, as if Sophia were a strange but kind child. There was no maternal recognition, no tears of joy or emotional hugs, just confusion and a bit of anxiety. Lucy hesitantly touched Sophia's hair as the girl approached, an automatic gesture of kindness toward a child, but without the deep connection that should exist between a mother and daughter. "Hello, dear," Lucy said in a soft but distant voice. "Are you lost? Do you need help finding your parents?" Sophia began to cry silently, tears streaming down her small face as she understood that her mother, even alive, had lost all memory of her. The following months were the hardest of Arthur's life, challenging in completely new ways. Eleanor, Leo, and Chloe were placed under intensive medical care at Oakhaven General Hospital in a special wing dedicated to neurological trauma recovery, while teams of specialist doctors tried to reverse the damage caused by Dr. Finch's treatments. The process was slow, painfully slow, and there were no guarantees of success. The doctors explained that the hippocampus and other brain structures responsible for long-term memory had suffered damage through the combination of drugs and misadministered electroconvulsive therapy. Some damage was potentially reversible with time, therapy, and appropriate medication. Other parts could be permanent. Each patient would respond differently depending on the extent of the damage and individual resilience. Arthur visited every day, religiously, even knowing he wouldn't be recognized, even knowing that each visit would bring the renewed pain of looking into his wife's eyes and seeing only confusion or polite distance. He brought old photos, carefully organized in albums. He told stories of their life together, every detail he could remember. He described the day they met at a mutual friend's party when he was 22 and she was 20. How she wore a green dress that matched her eyes, how she laughed at his bad jokes, how he knew in that moment he wanted to spend the rest of his life making her laugh. He told her about the disastrous marriage proposal where he had planned an elaborate proposal at a fancy restaurant but got so nervous he ended up proposing in the parking lot before they even went inside, the ring almost falling down a storm drain. How she said yes before he even finished the question. He told her about the twins, about how they were a complete surprise because they weren't trying for children yet, about the panic and joy when they found out there were two, about how Leo was born first, screaming indignantly, and Chloe came 3 minutes later, silent and observant from the start. He played the songs Eleanor used to love, carefully curated playlists of all the songs he remembered her humming around the house. He brought significant objects. The necklace he had given her on their 10th wedding anniversary, the stained recipe book that had belonged to her mother. The doctors said that consistent exposure to familiar elements could help trigger memories, that the brain had surprising healing capabilities when given proper support and enough time. Sophia was going through the same exhaustive process with Lucy, and Arthur ended up becoming a solid father figure for the girl during this difficult period. She was officially living with him now, having been placed in his temporary custody by the authorities while Lucy received intensive treatment and couldn't care for a child. Arthur formally enrolled her in school, arranged specialized therapy for child trauma, gave her the stability and love she had never known. And in return, Sophia gave him purpose and hope when it was hardest to keep believing. It was 6 months of painfully slow progress, so slow that sometimes it felt like nothing was changing. But small victories were celebrated as major triumphs. Arthur learned to find hope in the smallest things. Chloe began to remember the word daddy in a therapy session, saying it without context, without associating it with anyone specific, just knowing it was an important word. The therapist said it was a significant breakthrough, emotional language memories returning before visual or episodic ones. Leo had a physical reaction of familiarity upon seeing an old family photo at the zoo, his body involuntarily relaxing, even though his conscious brain didn't recognize the image. Somatic memories, the doctors explained, sometimes return before cognitive ones. Eleanor occasionally hummed melodies of songs they used to dance to together, not knowing why those specific melodies calmed her, not remembering the nights after the twins were asleep, when he and she would dance slowly in the kitchen without music, just sharing a comfortable silence. Every small breakthrough was meticulously documented by the doctors and celebrated by Arthur as proof that there was hope, that recovery was possible. The turning point came in a completely unexpected way. It was a Sunday afternoon, a full 8 months after the rescue. Arthur was in the hospital's therapeutic garden with Eleanor, who was having a particularly good day. Her doctors had said she was responding well to recent treatments, showing signs of fragmented memories returning. They were sitting on a wooden bench under a leafy tree, watching Leo and Chloe play nearby under the careful supervision of trained therapists. It was an almost normal scene, almost like it was before, except Eleanor still didn't know who those children were or why she spent so much time with them. A daisy was growing near the bench, small and white and absolutely perfect. Arthur picked it without conscious thought, an automatic gesture born from years of bringing daisies to Eleanor, to her grave, to the places she should have been. "They're your favorite," he said, offering the flower to her as he had done hundreds of times over the years. Eleanor took the flower, looking at it with a distant expression, her fingers caressing the soft petals, and then her voice came out trembling and uncertain, as if the words were coming from somewhere deep and hidden, simple and honest, without the pretense of roses or the arrogance of orchids. It was exactly, word for word, what she used to say, the same words Arthur remembered, her uttering dozens, hundreds of times throughout their years together. Words no one else could know, no photo recorded, no document contained. Arthur looked at her, breath held, heart beating so hard it physically hurt. "Eleanor, do you remember?" She looked at him, really looked at him in a way she hadn't since the rescue. Tears began to form in her eyes. There was still confusion there, still fog and uncertainty, but also something more. Something that had been absent for so long, a glimpse of true recognition, of genuine memory, of connection. I know you," she whispered, her voice broken with emotion. "I don't know how I know or where this knowledge comes from, but I know you. I know your face. I know your voice. You're important to me. You mean something." It wasn't a full recognition. She still didn't remember his name, how they met, their life together. But it was a start. It was the real beginning. Arthur gently took her hand, tears streaming freely down his face now. "My name is Arthur, and you're Eleanor. And I love you more than anything in this world, and we're going to make you remember everything, one step at a time." It really was the beginning. Slow, gradual, with many steps back mixed with steps forward, but it was the beginning of true recovery. In the following days and weeks, more memories began to return to Eleanor in ever larger fragments. Fragments at first, an image here, a feeling there. Then bigger pieces, complete scenes, though out of chronological order. She remembered the day they met, that green dress and the friends' party, the wedding in a small church, simple as she wanted, the birth of the twins, the pain and joy mixed, and slowly, piece by piece, day by day, she began to remember the accident too, fragmented and traumatic memories of the bus going off the road, the impact, the fire, being carried by someone, waking up in strange places, painful treatments that left her mind foggy. The doctors said that recovering traumatic memories was actually a positive sign, indicating that the blockages were being removed. But they were painful to process, and Eleanor had to work through them with specialized therapists. Leo and Chloe took longer, but they also began to remember, especially when they were all together as a family. Memories were stronger when shared. When Eleanor told a story she remembered, the twins sometimes had flashes of recognition. When Arthur described a family event, pieces returned to each of them. Chloe was the first of the twins to have a complete episodic memory return. She was playing with a doll Arthur had brought, one of her old dolls she had before, when she suddenly stopped and looked at him with wide eyes. "You gave me this doll for my birthday. There was a chocolate cake with pink and yellow candles, and Leo tried to blow out my candles, and we fought and you laughed. I remember." Leo had his first clear memory a week later, triggered by a cartoon that was playing on the TV in the recreation room. "We used to watch this on Saturday mornings, sitting on the floor right near the TV, and Mom always told us to sit further back." Each memory that returned was like finding a precious piece of a huge puzzle. They didn't come in order. They didn't form a coherent whole yet. But they were there, real and true, proving that recovery was possible. Sophia had less luck with Lucy. Her mother recovered some memories over the months, fragments of her previous life. She remembered working at the clinic, remembered having a daughter she loved more than anything, but many details remained hazy or completely lost. The damage in her case had been more extensive, the treatments more prolonged and aggressive because she had tried to resist more in the beginning. But she and Sophia began to build a new connection based not just on past memories, but on present experiences, on love developed in the now, rather than just remembered from before. A full year after the rescue, on a March afternoon that marked exactly 3 years since the original accident that had changed everything, Arthur organized a special gathering. The entire Vance family was together at home, because it was a home again, not just an empty apartment. Eleanor had been medically discharged months ago, authorized to live at home with regular outpatient follow-up. The twins were also at home, attending regular school with special support. The apartment had been transformed. The photos were back on the walls, not hidden but celebrated. The twins' toys were scattered around the living room as they should be. Laughter was back in those rooms that had been silent and dead for so long. Life, real and messy and beautiful life, filling every space. Sophia and Lucy were there too. Officially, Sophia still lived mainly with Arthur because it provided a stability that Lucy, still recovering and rebuilding her life, couldn't completely provide yet. But they spent weekends together and slowly built a mother-daughter relationship that was different from what it could have been, but still real and full of love. There were talks about eventually reuniting mother and daughter completely when Lucy was more recovered, but for now the current arrangement worked. And Arthur discovered he had room in his heart and his life to be a father figure to Sophia as much as to his own biological children. "I don't remember everything," Eleanor said on that significant afternoon, sitting on the living room sofa holding Arthur's hand. "There are pieces that are still missing, events that have disappeared, entire periods that are just fog, and maybe they'll always be missing. The doctors said a full recovery might not be possible, but I remember what's important. I remember you. I remember us. I remember loving you." Leo and Chloe, now 11, were more resilient in a way that only children can be. Their young brains showed remarkable plasticity, recovering memories more quickly than Eleanor. They adapted, accepted the gaps in their memories as part of their story, and moved forward building new memories while recovering old ones. There was still regular therapy, individual and family sessions. There were still difficult moments when traumatic memories resurfaced intrusively. There were still nights when Chloe woke up crying from nightmares about fire. There were still days when Leo got confused about what was a real memory versus what he had been told. But they were getting better. Slowly, but consistently, they were healing as a family. As for Dr. Finch and Oscar, both would face appropriate justice. The trial was a spectacle that dominated national headlines for weeks. "Clinic of horror. Doctor held patients prisoner, erasing their memories," the headlines screamed. 16 identified victims, each with devastating stories. families who had mourned dead loved ones discovering they were alive. The scandal shook the entire private healthcare industry, leading to regulatory reforms and increased oversight. Dr. Alistair Finch was sentenced to 35 years in prison on multiple charges, including kidnapping, fraud, practicing medicine without a license through unapproved treatments, and torture. Oscar Ferrell received 22 years as an accomplice. Several others were also convicted. The corrupt medical examiners who falsified reports, the hospital employees who identified potential victims. Every piece of the criminal network was meticulously dismantled and punished. But for Arthur and his family, the trials and convictions were secondary. Justice was important, yes, but it wasn't what really mattered in the end. What mattered was that they were together. On that special March night, after everyone had gone to sleep, after Arthur had checked each of the rooms as he did every night, after he had kissed the forehead of each sleeping child, he stayed awake for a long time. He sat in the dark living room, only the city light coming through the windows, and thought about the last 3 years, about the pain of the initial loss, about the miracle of the discovery, about the agonizing journey of recovery, about everything that had been destroyed and everything that was being patiently rebuilt. He thought about Lily, the small, traumatized street child who had come to him in the cemetery with an impossible story that turned out to be truer than he could have ever imagined. Sophia, as she now insisted on being called, had been his guardian angel, his guide to the truth when everything seemed absolutely lost. And he, in turn, had become a father to her when she most needed stability and love. Arthur got up silently and went to Sophia's room, finding the door slightly ajar, as she still liked, so as not to feel trapped. The girl slept peacefully, her curls spread over the pillow in a dark halo, a small smile on her relaxed face. No longer the scared, traumatized child he had found. There were still challenges ahead. Still, healing needed. Trauma doesn't just disappear completely, but she was on her way to being truly happy. He then checked on the twins' room. Leo was snoring softly in his bed, one leg hanging off the blanket, completely relaxed. Chloe slept, hugging a teddy bear that Arthur had carefully saved for years, waiting with a faith he didn't know he had for the day he could return it to her. When he finally gave it to her months ago, she had looked at the bear with immediate recognition, hugging it tightly and whispering, "I remember him." Finally, Arthur returned to his own room, where Eleanor slept peacefully on her side of the bed that had been empty for so long. He lay down carefully beside her, trying not to wake her, but she stirred anyway, and even still half asleep, she automatically snuggled against him, her head finding the familiar space on his shoulder, a familiar gesture that her body remembered even when her mind had forgotten, a muscle memory that had persisted even when cognitive memories had been erased. Arthur hugged her gently, inhaling the familiar scent of her lavender shampoo that she had started using again after he mentioned. It was his favorite. He closed his eyes, feeling for the first time in years a true and profound peace. It wasn't the peace of an absence of problems, because there were many challenges still ahead. His family's recovery was an ongoing process that would continue for years. Sophia still needed years of therapy and support. Lucy was still struggling to rebuild her life and memories. But it was the peace of knowing they were all together, that the worst was over, that each day would be a little better than the last, that love was stronger than trauma, that family could be recovered even when it seemed lost forever. His family was home. They were together. They were healing, slowly but surely. And although the road ahead was still challenging and long, although there was still much recovery work to be done, scars that would always remain, memories that might never fully return, Arthur knew they could face anything, because they had the most important thing of all. They had each other. And in the end, that's what really mattered. The next morning, Arthur woke up to the wonderful smell of pancakes being made, a smell he hadn't experienced in years, but that was deeply familiar and comforting. He went down to the kitchen, his bare feet making little noise on the wooden floor, and found a scene that made his heart fill with a joy so intense it almost hurt. Eleanor was in the kitchen, trying to remember the pancake recipe she used to make every Sunday before the accident. Her movements were a bit hesitant, consulting a recipe notebook that Arthur had found stored away, but there was determination on her face. Sophia was helping, standing on a chair next to the stove, reading instructions from a colorful children's cookbook Arthur had bought for her. Leo and Chloe were sitting at the kitchen table, animatedly discussing some cartoon they had watched yesterday, their voices rising in volume as they each defended their favorite character. A completely normal, completely healthy argument, the kind of silly fight siblings have in happy homes all over the world. It was a common, everyday, absolutely ordinary scene. Just any family having a normal breakfast on a Monday morning. And it was the most beautiful thing Arthur had ever seen in his entire life. "Good morning, family," he said, his voice laden with an emotion he tried to hide but couldn't completely manage. Everyone turned to look at him simultaneously, and 4 smiles lit up 4 beloved faces. "Good morning, Dad," Leo and Chloe answered in unison. "Good morning, Daddy," Sophia added, using the title she had started using a few months ago, with permission from Lucy, who understood that Arthur had become as much a father figure to the girl as her biological father who had never been present. "Good morning, my love," Eleanor said, smiling at him in that way she used to, that specific smile that was just for him. And in those simple words was contained the entire journey they had traveled together. All the suffering and all the healing, all the loss and all the recovery, all the despair and all the hope. It was a true new beginning, not an impossible return to the past, because that could never happen. Too much pain had occurred, too many changes had taken place, too many scars had been formed. They were different now, all of them, transformed by what they had been through. But it was the beginning of something new and precious, built on the foundations of what had been, strengthened by the suffering they had overcome together, made more valuable because they now knew how fragile and precious it was. And as Arthur looked around that sunny kitchen, seeing his imperfect but complete family, each carrying their own scars but together and healing, he knew it had been worth it. Every moment of acute pain, every second of paralyzing doubt, every tear shed in loneliness or despair. It was all worth it to get here, to have this moment, to have these future moments they would build together. He joined them in the kitchen, helping Eleanor with the pancakes, laughing when Sophia accidentally put too much salt in the batter and they had to start over. Mediating the lively argument between the twins about which superhero was the best, making strong coffee the way he liked it, being a family, imperfect, scarred, but fundamentally whole. Because in the end, after everything, through all the suffering and all the struggle, Arthur had learned the most fundamental truth of the universe, a truth that had been tested to its absolute limit but had proven to be unbreakable. Love always finds a way back home. Always. No matter how distant the path, how dark the journey, how impossible it seems, love persists, love endures, love conquers, and they were the living proof of it. As the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating his reunited family, Arthur silently gave thanks. He thanked Lily, who became Sophia, who had the courage to tell a truth no one would believe. He thanked Anthony and Patricia, who risked so much to help. He thanked the dedicated doctors who worked tirelessly on their recovery. But mostly, he was thankful for never having given up, for having followed that impossible hope, for having believed a 4-year-old child when all logic said it was impossible, because in the end, it was hope that saved them. Hope against all evidence, faith against all reason, love against all obstacles. And as he sat down to have breakfast with his family, slightly burnt but love-made pancakes, Arthur Vance finally allowed true peace to enter his heart. He was home. They were home. Together. And that was all that had ever mattered. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.